Welcome to today's program. So, today I thought I would cover more on essential insurance coverages for small businesses. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this a little bit this time is because there are so many small businesses out there in the market. And of course, insurance being quite a complicated product, it's not so straightforward. I think it's important for small businesses to ensure that they have the right type of coverages. Now, but the good news is this. Number one is that there are a lot of providers out there where they provide SME packages. That means they are pretty standard and they're very affordable. And what happens is that in most instances, these coverages, they come with quite a few types of coverages or coverage types, and they're very useful. So I think it's probably a good idea to just go through some of the things so that you have a good understanding of what they mean, what they cover, what they don't cover, and what are the things that you may want to look out for. First things first, small business packages, I want you to know, offered by most insurers out there, they are pretty much similar. Sure, there are some one or two extra deal sweeteners. However, the fundamentals, or rather the basic plan, the framework of it is pretty much similar. So some of the things to look out for, number one, is of course they would have like a fire coverage. So without getting too much details, fire covers for fire, obviously. Number two, you can also insure to cover things where your equipment, not just the building. You can also cover for, let's say, bursting of pipes. So there are different additions when it comes to fire, not just, let's say, a fire and it destroys the building. So look out for some of those things. Number two is that for fire insurance, now this may be this is pretty much standard for most coverages here in this region. However, if you operate a business that's different, you should really inform them. Okay, this is it. When you purchase fire insurance, understand that in most instances for fire, they may not cover when it comes to things where it involves radioactive radiation. And number two, let's say bushfires, or rather known as, or better known as lalang. So these are things that they may not cover. So it's not a problem if, let's say, you are operating in the suburban area, right, in office commercial area. I don't see that as a problem. However, if your business operates, let's say, in the outback, or let's say in the outskirts of some area which has, like, let's say, fire prone stuff like radioactive, or let's say elements like where a lot of lalang, you're in the field and so forth, you need to pay close attention to that. Inform your insurer, inform your broker, ensure that these things are communicated to them so that they are aware. So that is your fire insurance. Number two, another thing that you see that is quite common in these SME packages, of course, is your money insurance, usually money in transit or money in the premise. What does that mean? So usually this coverage will basically include things where if there's money stolen, burglary, or robbed. Now, what kind of businesses need that? Well, typically businesses where you are running on a retail model, or maybe let's say F&B, or you even provide some sort of services. Actually, most businesses, come to think of it, most businesses where you collect cash, you have cash collection, right? You have cash collection, and what happens is that in the event, let's say there is a burglary, you left the money there, you did not take it to the bank every night because it can be dangerous, there is a break-in, the money's gone. That's how your money insurance will protect you or cover you. Or sometimes, let's say the money in transit, where you take it, let's say, to the bank nearby every night, and you get robbed and so forth. That's where there is coverage. So that's what they mean by money in transit. So that's what SME, most of them, they actually have that feature. Look out for that. Fidelity guarantee. Now, this is quite interesting. Fidelity guarantee usually is referring to the employees. For example, where there is dishonesty, they took money. One way or another, they took money, and that's where your fidelity guarantee comes into place. So typical companies or businesses that actually have that, it's again pretty much all your retail, your F&B, where they ran off with the money. Basically, there was no criminal element where they were robbed, or there was burglary, but they ran off with the money. So that's what fidelity guarantee is. The next one is basically what we call plate glass. That means if the glass gets destroyed, the glass at your outlet, there is coverage for that. So again, let's say if you're an F&B, food and beverage, or you run a restaurant, and basically you have a lot of glass surrounding so that people can look inside, makes the place look pretty and so forth, and the glass gets destroyed or so forth. That's where your plate glass insurance comes in. Now, let's talk about the next one, which is really important. And this is mostly a requirement for most companies that are operating out there. It's actually called your public liability insurance. Now, public liability insurance basically covers on, let's say, your negligence and on a third-party injury or, let's say, damage to their property. What does that mean? In layman's language, let's say, again, simple example, you are running, let's say, a restaurant. And what happens is that one of the servers maybe spills some water on the ground. The member of the public, which is a third party, the member of the public steps on it, slips and falls, and thankfully survives, but let's say breaks his or her hand, they could actually take legal action. And that's where your public liability comes in, where it would help the cost of defense and settlement and so forth. Now, it also covers for property damage. So let's go back to the example where the lady slips and falls, and she is actually hanging on to her laptop, and the laptop is damaged. And because of that, she is seeking compensation because her property has been damaged because of your negligence. So that's where your public liability comes in also, and it covers. So it covers basically negligence on your part as an operator, and it covers for basically third-party bodily injury and also some of the property damage. So that's public liability. So again, this is very common. If you're operating a workshop, if you're operating a place where there is a lot of members of the public coming in, restaurants, or maybe it could be as simple as, let's say, an event hall, you would need that because as far as members of the public come in, so you have a duty of care to ensure that it's a safe environment. And the next one is employer's liability. So what employer's liability covers is basically, let's just take example where you run an office, lots of wires hanging around, lots of computers all over the floor, and the employee trips, falls, hits his face on, let's say, the table, the corner, hurts himself. That's where your employer liability comes in. That means any injury to your employees. Now, this is not to be confused with your public liability, which we talked about just now, because public liability is more to third party, right? And that means members of the public, your employees are not third party, they're considered first party. Okay, so employer's liability covers for you as an employer, where you're basically obligated to actually provide a reasonable safe workplace, so to speak. So that's employer's liability. Most SME coverages or SME plans would have that coverage, and then that's what it covers. And the next one, of course, is burglary, which is common. That means someone came in, they broke in, and they took equipment, they took stuff from your place and all that. Your burglary insurance for your SME package would cover that. It would usually cover the cost of the things that are stolen according to your insured value, of course. Number two, it also covers for, let's say, damage caused by, let's say, the break-in, right? So you can actually claim for that. So companies actually need that as usual. Mostly, actually, a lot of companies, right? Any company that you have assets inside, or you run an office, or you run a shop, this one is totally logical. This is totally a very required sort of coverage that you need to look out for. So that's pretty standard in most of your SME plans. Another thing I forgot to add in is that when it comes to, let's say, your SME plans, most of them come with a fixed cover. That means they go, let's say, they will cover you 50,000 for, let's say, burglary, example. Fire, let's say 200,000, it's fixed. If you want anything else, you would actually need to ask for, let's say, an upgrade, or what we call in this industry an endorsement, right? But just remember, they come with usually different tiers and the coverage is set. The next thing you would see is, of course, your all risk insurance. Now, what is all risk? I think the simplest way to put all risk is usually it covers for equipment and it covers for fire plus everything else, except things it says that it does not cover, which is quite strange, right? But In this case, for let's say your all risk insurance for your SMEs, usually people look at that for their equipment, right? Your laptops, the the projector, right? All the expensive stuff. But usually for all risk for these SME coverages, they usually extend all the way only to accidental damage. If you dropped it accidentally, they cover. But if you take it off site, that means you take it, let's say you have employees and you have a sales team, they take their laptops out, they basically head off to a client location, it gets stolen, that may not be covered. It only covers on premise. So you need to be aware of that. So that's what your ORIS is, usually on your equipment and so forth. Another common cover that we see on SME packages, it's basically the group personal accident, GPA. Now, what is the GPA? The GPA basically covers your employees. In the event there is an accident, they get hurt, they fall. Basically, there is a cover for their medical reimbursement. Usually, it's quite a low amount. It's like 2 or 3,000 ringgit, but it's good enough, right? Just in case they fall, at least they can claim for something for their medical treatment. And there is usually a limit to that where they will say maybe I will cover 15 people or 20 people and so forth. Check with your insurer. But this GPA, it's usually built into the SME coverage. And it's something that's good to have because at least, let's say if you're running a business and you have that in place, although, right? Sometimes it may be your fault, employee falls. We talked about this earlier. The employee falls because wires were everywhere. But at least you can actually you know that there is some sort of coverage for them to actually seek treatment, and it doesn't need to be out of pocket. So good to have. Good to have. Now, there are also some optional coverages that's usually in the SME plan. Now, these are things that are optional. You don't need to pick it up, but they do have their value. Some of the things that are included is, of course, the fire consequential loss. What is a fire consequential loss? Very simple. In event of a fire, fine, the material damage, let's say of a building and all that gets burned now, you get insured for that. We understand that. Let's talk a little bit about in the event there is a fire and unfortunately it has destroyed a lot of your equipment and you cannot operate the business. So there is basically a loss there, that money not made. So that's where fire consequential loss comes in. The insurer will agree to pick up some of the loss that you have suffered as a result of a fire, and you can't continue to operate the business for an X amount of time. So that's what fire consequential loss is. So that is an optional coverage that you can look at. And of course, sometimes your equipment fire coverage, you have to actually extend it, not just on the building. You also want to talk about basically the equipment and so forth. I think the best way to do this, if you were to, let's say, pick up some of these plans, is you really need to sit down and at least have like an inventory list, right? Your register of some of the assets that you have, how much you've paid for it, right? And one tip I can give you is that when you do the calculation for this, you need to know exactly how much you paid for it. Let's say 100,000 example, then you insure for 100,000 ringgit. You do not insure it for, let's say, the depreciated value, right? You do not, that's not how it's done. It has to be insured according to how much you paid for it. So that's very important. So from there, you would be able to tell how much you need to insure and so forth. Another thing is that you can also cover, which is also quite common in a lot of coverages out there right now, is the directors and officers liability, D&O. Now, what is D&O? Real quick. Basically is mismanagement. That means mismanagement liability. So let's say there is an incident of, let's say, unlawful dismissal. They take you up to court and so forth. Your directors and officers liability comes in. So that's D&O. In a nutshell, there are more things there, but I think let's just cover that as a basic. So there you go. These are some of the very basic coverages that you can see in a typical SME package. And this is what they cover. Now you can shop around with different insurers and providers and so forth. They would offer slightly different packages and slightly different amount. My biggest advice would be that what you should be doing is you should be at least having a list, preparing a list. I believe an inventory list or register where you know exactly how much you have plowed into the business, how much is the building, and how much is your operating costs and so forth. Then from there, you start searching for a cover that is more suitable for you. The pricing is pretty much, again, quite similar. And some companies, as I mentioned, would have one or two deal sweeteners there, but those are just deal sweeteners. Always focus on things that are really, really important for you. And you should be able to get a decent cover out there because they are very competitive and they provide really good value. A lot of them are very, very affordable anyway. So this is today's program. As usual, if you need some assistance, you can always visit our website at www.coverbuddies.com. That's www.coverbuddies.com. Drop us a line or chat with us on our live chat, and we will do our best to be able to assist you. See you in the next program.